The sound of the pen scratching across the paper was the only noise in the vast, sterile living room. It wasn't a decisive sound, not a flourish or a statement. It was a dry, bureaucratic rasp, the sound of something being cancelled. Marcus Vance didn't even look up as he signed the final page of the divorce petition. His signature was the same one he used on multi-million-dollar investment term sheets, a confident, slashing line. He tossed the document across the cold expanse of the marble coffee table toward me, the pages skidding to a halt just before they tumbled onto the floor. "It's done," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth, any history, any of the late-night whispers that had once filled this very room when it was just an empty space filled with dreams and a second-hand futon. "Don't make this difficult, Bella. You know I have the best lawyers in the city. Harrison Stone doesn't lose." I sat on the edge of the gray velvet sofa, my hands folded neatly in my lap to keep them from shaking. The sofa was a recent acquisition, part of the curated lifestyle phase Marcus had entered once Vance Stream's valuation crossed the 100 million mark. It was beautiful, expensive, and as cold and unyielding as the man who bought it. I was wearing a faded navy cardigan, a relic from a different life, the cuffs slightly frayed. My hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, the kind of style that said utility, not vanity. To the outside world, and apparently definitively to my husband of 5 years, I looked like exactly what he said I was: plain, boring, unambitious, a piece of the past that no longer fit the glossy future he was building. "I haven't asked for anything, Marcus," I said softly. My voice sounded small in the cavernous penthouse, a tiny pebble dropped into a deep, polished well. He finally looked at me then, a quick, dismissive glance that swept from my worn-out flats to my tired face. It was an audit, not a look, a valuation. "And he found me worthless." "Of course you haven't," he said, standing up and adjusting the cufflinks at his wrists, Cartier. I remembered the day I gave them to him. It was for our 2nd anniversary. He was still a struggling coder then, working out of a rented garage that smelled of damp concrete and ambition. I had saved for 2 years from my librarian's salary, skipping lunches, taking on extra freelance archival work for universities to buy them. He'd cried that night, holding the small box as if it were a holy relic, promising me a life of palaces. Now, as the CEO of Vance Stream, a tech darling on the vicious, glittering cusp of a massive IPO, he wore them as a badge of his own arrival, a trophy he'd won for himself. He looked at me not with gratitude for that memory, but with a faint irritation, as if I were a stain on the pristine, minimalist perfection of his current image. "Let us be real, Bella," he continued, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a god's-eye view of the Seattle skyline, a view he believed he owned. "You don't fit the image anymore. The investors, the board, they expect a certain caliber of partner, a certain presentation. You're quaint. And quaint doesn't sell software. Quaint doesn't inspire confidence in a disruptor." The electronic lock on the front door chimed, a confident, melodic beep that signaled entry. It was a sound that had once meant Marcus was home, a sound that used to make my heart lift. Now it just signaled another invasion. Tiffany walked in, bringing a gust of expensive perfume, something citrusy and sharp, and the crisp, damp scent of the autumn afternoon. She was 24, the newly appointed VP of Public Relations for Vance Stream, and the living, breathing reason Marcus was currently, so efficiently, liquidating his marriage. She didn't look at me. Her eyes went straight to Marcus, a laser beam of proprietary admiration. "Is it signed?" she asked, her voice bright and efficient. She walked over to him, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the polished concrete floor, and reached up to pick a piece of invisible lint from the lapel of his suit. The gesture was intimate, practiced. It was a performance for an audience of one, me. "Just finished," Marcus said, and his entire demeanor shifted. The cold, transactional arrogance he'd shown me melted away, replaced by a charming, almost boyish warmth. It was a switch he could flip instantly, and seeing it turned on for her, after the years I'd spent believing it was real, felt like a physical blow to the stomach. Bella was just agreeing to the terms, no alimony. She keeps her whatever that car is, and she vacates the premises by Friday. Tiffany turned her head slightly, finally acknowledging my presence with a smirk. It was a cruel, tight expression, the kind worn by someone who has already won and is just lingering to enjoy the victory lap. Friday, she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That's generous, Marcus. We have the pre-IPO gala on Saturday. I wanted to use this room for the pre-party photos. The lighting is so much better in here than at the venue. Her eyes raked over me, a slow, deliberate scan that took in the cardigan, the simple slacks, the absence of jewelry. "You can probably pack your things in a few hours, right?" she said, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "It's not like you have much furniture, jewelry, you know." I stood up slowly. My legs felt unsteady, but I willed them to hold me. I was trembling, but not with the fear they expected. It was a suppressed rage, a molten core of fury that had been building for months, years maybe, banked and hidden under layers of love and hope and stupid, stupid loyalty. It burned so hot in my chest I was surprised they couldn't see the smoke. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, past the expensive suit and the carefully curated aura of success. I saw the boy who couldn't afford ramen noodles, who I'd fed with my meager paychecks. I saw the man whose wrists had ached from coding, whose head I had held in my lap as I typed his lines for him late into the night. I saw the shattered creature after his first startup imploded, weeping on the floor of that damp garage, and how I had held him, whispering promises that we would try again, that we could do it. "I'll be out by tonight," I said. My voice didn't waver. It came out steady, low, a calm statement in the midst of their emotional storm. Marcus let out a short, derisive laugh. Even better. He fished his phone from his pocket, tapping at the screen with his thumb. "Look, I'll have my assistant Venmo you, I don't know, $1,000. Call it a relocation fee. Get yourself a motel room somewhere clean for a week or two while you figure things out." The condescension was so thick it choked the air. $1,000. A motel room, this from the man whose company's upcoming IPO was splashed across the cover of Forbes. "I don't want your money, Marcus," I said, walking toward the hallway where my single, pre-packed suitcase waited. I had known this was coming. A wife always knows. You feel the temperature drop in the room long before the ice finally forms. "Good," he called after me, his voice echoing in the stark space. "Because you're not getting a dime. My lawyers made sure the prenup is ironclad. You leave with what you came with, nothing." I paused at the arched doorway that led to the private elevator foyer. I turned back one last time. The penthouse sprawled behind them, a monument to a future I was being erased from. The city glittered through the window, a kingdom he believed he had conquered alone. "You're right, Marcus," I said, and my eyes met his. I let him see them then, not the eyes of the meek archivist he thought he knew, but something older, darker, a well of patience that had finally run dry. "I will leave with exactly what I came with." Remember that, he didn't watch me go. He was already turning away, reaching for the champagne bottle sweating in a silver bucket on a side table I'd found at a flea market. He began pouring 2 glasses, his laughter mingling with Tiffany's as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me into a silent, descending tomb. The rain in Seattle was relentless, a soft, gray curtain that blurred the shining towers of the downtown core into smears of light. It matched my mood perfectly, a quiet, soaking misery that promised no end. I drove my 2014 Honda Civic, the one Marcus had bought used for me 3 years ago as a practical runaround, away from the glittering waterfront and up toward the older, historic districts of the city. The car rattled slightly, a familiar, comforting sound. I wasn't going to a motel. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to a heavy, wrought iron gate set into a high stone wall. Behind it stood a brownstone building that looked less like a law firm and more like a private fortress, a relic from a time when wealth knew how to be silent and imposing. Damp ivy clung to the dark brick. A single, discreet brass plaque by the reinforced oak door read, Penhaligon and Roth Associates, S. 1902. I buzzed the intercom. A grainy, staticky voice crackled out. "The office is closed." "It's Isabella," I said, leaning close to the speaker. The rain dripped from my hair. "I need to see Arthur." There was a long pause, filled only with the hiss of the intercom and the patter of rain on the car roof. Then, with a heavy, resonant clank that sounded like the opening of a vault, the electronic latch released. The interior was a world away from the glass and chrome sterility of Marcus's world. It smelled of old leather, aged mahogany, and the faint, sweet scent of pipe tobacco. Persian rugs swallowed sound. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines cracked and faded with age and use. This was not a place for flashy deals or hostile takeovers played out in the press. This was where legacies were guarded, where fortunes were shepherded silently from one generation to the next, away from the prying eyes of the world. Arthur Penhaligon was waiting for me in the library. He stood by a massive stone fireplace, though no fire burned. In his 70s, he moved with the slow, dangerous grace of an old lion, a creature that had seen everything and feared nothing. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the legal custodian, the sworn keeper of secrets that could topple governments and rewrite markets. He had been my father's closest friend and confidant, and after my parents died, he became mine. "Bella," he said, and his face, usually a map of stern neutrality, softened into genuine warmth. He didn't offer a handshake. He crossed the room and pulled me into a brief, fierce hug. He smelled of tweed and that same pipe tobacco. "I was wondering when you'd come back to us." The simple kindness undid me. The tears I had refused to shed in front of Marcus and Tiffany finally fell, hot and silent, soaking into the shoulder of Arthur's worn jacket. "He served the papers today, Arthur," I managed, my voice thick. "He's kicking me out. He's with his PR director." He told me I was bad for his image. Arthur guided me to a deep, leather wingback chair that seemed to embrace me. He said nothing, just walked to a crystal decanter and poured 2 fingers of amber scotch into a heavy tumbler. He handed it to me. "Neat." "Marcus Vance," Arthur said, the name a dry observation. "The boy wonder, I've seen the news. His company is valued at what, 300 million, heading for $1 billion after the IPO next month. He thinks he's a god," I whispered, the scotch burning a path down my throat. "He told me I'm leaving with nothing. He mocked my clothes. He offered me $1,000 like I was a beggar on the street." Arthur's eyes, pale and sharp behind his spectacles, narrowed. He walked behind his massive, scarred oak desk, a desk that had been in this office since the firm's founding, and picked up a thin file. "He filed a motion this afternoon, Bella." My clerks picked it up. He opened the file, his lips pressed into a thin line of disgust. "It's worse than just a divorce." A cold dread, different from the hot shame, began to pool in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "He's suing you," Arthur said, the words precise and icy, "for emotional distress and fraudulent misrepresentation. He claims you tricked him into marriage to ride his coattails to wealth. And now that you are, in his words, no longer contributing financially or socially, he wants the court to declare the marriage void ab initio, as if it never legally existed, so he doesn't even have to split the appreciation of assets during the marriage. He wants to erase you, Bella. Not just dismiss you, he wants to humiliate you. He wants to drag you through the mud in open court to show his investors and the world that he is a ruthless decision-maker, unburdened by sentiment." I stared at him. The room seemed to tilt. Fraudulent misrepresentation. The words were so clinical, so vicious. He was claiming I had deceived him. I laughed then, a dry, humorless sound that scraped my throat. fraudulent misrepresentation. He thinks I misrepresented myself. He thinks I'm a poor, simple archivist who got lucky snagging a tech genius before he blew up. Arthur didn't laugh, he just looked at me, his head slightly tilted. But he has no idea, does he? No, I said, the word final. I wanted a real life Arthur. I wanted to be loved for me, not the legacy, not the name. So I never told him. I lived on my librarian's salary. I clipped coupons. I drove that rusted Honda. I let him believe he was the provider, the savior, the sole architect of our fortune. And he punished you for it, Arthur said quietly. It wasn't a question. He opened a drawer in his desk, a drawer that required an old-fashioned key he wore on a chain around his neck. From it he pulled out a thick envelope, sealed not with glue but with a disc of crimson wax stamped with an intricate crest, a silver hawk in flight clutching a single golden key, the seal of the Sterling Hargrave Sovereign Trust. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, a connection to a past I had tried so hard to outrun. Your grandfather's trust matures on your 30th birthday, Isabella, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a near whisper as if even here in this vault of secrets the information was too powerful to speak aloud. That was 3 days ago. I know, I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Do you know the current valuation? He asked. I shook my head. I haven't checked the statement since I left the estate, since I walked away from it all at 22 to become normal. Arthur slid a single sheet of heavy linen paper across the polished surface of the desk toward me. It was covered in neat, typed columns. My eyes went straight to the bottom line. I blinked. The zeros swam before my eyes, a river of them, a staggering, incomprehensible procession. I had to consciously force my brain to parse them, to count the commas. It wasn't wealth, it was geography, it was its own nation-state. That's liquid, I whispered, my voice trembling now for an entirely different reason. That is the diversified portfolio, Arthur confirmed, his finger tapping the paper. Shipping, pharmaceuticals, private equity, real estate including, I might add, 40% of the commercial port holdings right here in Seattle and the Sterling Tower in Manhattan, the art collection which is housed in Zurich. The Hargrave estate in Surrey, you are the sole beneficiary. The Sterling family built the railroads that opened the West. The Hargraves built the banking systems that funded it. You, my dear, are not just rich, you are a sovereign power. You could, if you were so inclined, buy Vance Stream 10 times over and shutter it out of boredom before lunch. I stared at the number. It was abstract, it was a theoretical force, but it was mine, it had always been mine. I had just chosen to forget it. Does he know? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Nobody knows, Arthur said firmly. We've kept your identity buried under 3 layers of blind trusts, shell corporations, and private foundations, just as your father instructed after the accident. To the world, you are Isabella Sterling, freelance archivist with a modest trust from a deceased uncle. To the IRS and the very inner circle of global finance, you are the silent chairwoman of the board, a ghost with a golden pen. Arthur leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his fingers steepled. So the question is, Bella, how do you want to handle Mr. Vance? We can settle this quietly. I can make a phone call, have a discreet meeting. We can reveal the assets, and he will likely faint dead away and beg for forgiveness on his knees. It would be over by tomorrow, clean, surgical. I thought about it. I thought about the way Marcus had looked at me earlier that day, the way he had brushed the imaginary lint from his suit after Tiffany touched him. I thought about the sound of her laugh, sharp and cruel, echoing in my penthouse. I thought about the $1,000 for a motel, the sneer in his voice when he said, quaint. I thought about the legal motion, the attempt to brand me a fraud and a parasite in the eyes of the law. The trembling in my hands stopped. The tears dried up, a profound glacial calm settled over me. It was the calm of a chess player who has finally seen the board clearly, many moves ahead. I stood up. My spine straightened, the slight, defensive slump of the defeated wife vanishing. In its place was the posture I had been taught since childhood, the unconscious bearing of someone born to rule rooms they never deigned to enter. I felt the weight of generations at my back. "No," I said, and my voice had changed. It had dropped an octave, becoming cold, precise, devoid of all the softness Marcus had come to despise. No quiet settlements. He wants a court battle. He wants to stand in front of a judge and prove how clever he is, how he's outmaneuvered the little woman. "Let's give him a show. He has Harrison's stone," Arthur warned, though a flicker of approval sparked in his eyes. "They will play dirty. They will mock you in open court long before we ever get to the financial disclosure phase. They will try to break your spirit on the record. Let them," I said, and I felt a dangerous, unfamiliar glint in my own eyes. I saw it reflected in the window, dark and unyielding. "I want him to say it all on the record. I want him to stand before the court and tell the judge exactly how worthless I am. I want him to detail every perceived failure, every missed opportunity, every way in which I didn't measure up. I want him to dig his grave so deep with such conviction and arrogance that when the truth comes out, he can never, ever climb out." Arthur Penhaligon's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. It was a predator's smile. He uncapped a fountain pen with a decisive click. "I'll file our appearance first thing tomorrow. We will not list the assets yet. We will wait for the mandatory discovery phase. We will let him think he's winning right up until the moment the ground vanishes beneath his feet." "Perfect," I said. "One more thing, Bella," Arthur said, making a note on a pad. "Yes, I believe you'll need a dress for court, something not the cardigan." I almost smiled. "I believe my mother's vintage Chanel collection is in the climate-controlled storage on Fifth Avenue." "It is," Arthur confirmed. "And I'll have Henry bring the car around. The Rolls is discreet, but—" "No," I interrupted, shaking my head. "I'll take the Honda. Let's keep the illusion alive for just a little longer. Let him have his confidence. It will make the fall that much more poetic." Arthur gave a slow, solemn nod. "As you wish, Miss Sterling." The name hung in the air between us. It was Bella, the nickname Marcus used. It was Isabella Vance, the identity he was trying to annul. It was my name, my real name. And for the first time in 5 years, it felt like a suit of armor settling into place. I turned and walked back out into the Seattle rain. It felt different now. It wasn't a misery, it was a cleansing, a preparation. The storm was coming, but for the first time I was not the one who would be swept away. I was the one holding the lightning. 2 weeks later, the deposition was held in the conference room of Stone, Miller and Associates, a glass-walled aquarium suspended in the sky on the 45th floor of the city's newest financial tower. Everything about the space was engineered for psychological dominance. The table was a single, 15-foot slab of polished black obsidian that reflected the cold, gray clouds scudding past the windows. The chairs were low-slung, minimalist sculptures of leather and steel, designed to make you feel like you were sinking or perhaps sliding off. The view was a vertiginous panorama of the city and the sound beyond, a vista reserved for the masters of this particular universe. It was a room that whispered without subtlety that the people who met here decided fates. I sat on one side of that dark, mirror-like table, flanked only by Arthur Penhaligon. We were an island of anachronism in this temple of modern avarice. Arthur looked profoundly, deliberately out of place. He wore a tweed three-piece suit, the wool slightly napped with age, and he carried the faint, comforting scent of pipe tobacco and old libraries into the sterile, HEPA-filtered air. He had spent the first 5 minutes after we arrived slowly and methodically polishing his spectacles with a silk handkerchief, utterly unimpressed by the theatrical gloom around us. Opposite us sat the army. Harrison Stone, Marcus's lead counsel, was a man who appeared to have been carved from a block of granite and then draped in Italian wool. He had a square jaw, steely gray hair cut with military precision, and eyes that held no warmth, only calculation. His reputation preceded him, a barracuda in the genteel pond of family law, known for making opposing spouses weep with humiliation within 20 minutes of a deposition starting. Beside him sat two junior associates, their faces set in masks of serious concentration, fingers poised over laptop keyboards, ready to transcribe my every stumble, and next to Stone sat Marcus himself. Marcus did not look at me. He was absorbed in his phone, thumbs scrolling endlessly, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to the person sitting just behind him, against the far wall. Tiffany. She was there, a blatant violation of professional protocol, positioned as moral support. She was a spectator at a gladiator match, dressed in a cream-colored sheath dress that screamed quiet luxury, her legs crossed, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips as she surveyed the room. She was waiting for the blood. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers hovering over the silent keys of her stenotype machine, a neutral priestess in this ritual of dismantling. "We are on the record," Stone announced, his voice a deep, resonant boom that needed no microphone. It was a voice used to commanding courtrooms and boardrooms. "This is the deposition of Isabella Vance, née Sterling, in the matter of Vance versus Vance. Present are Harrison Stone of counsel for the petitioner, Marcus Vance, and Arthur Penhaligon of counsel for the respondent. Also present is the witness." He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the dark table. He offered a smile, a thin stretching of lips that never touched his cold eyes. "Mrs. Vance, we are here to establish the extent of your contribution, or lack thereof, to the marital estate. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. You are under oath, do you understand?" "I do," I said. My voice was quiet but clear in the hushed room. It did not echo. It was absorbed by the soundproofing, a small, firm pebble dropped into a deep well. "Let's begin with the basics," Stone said, picking up a single sheet of paper, though I was certain he had every detail memorized. "You have been married to my client for 5 years. In that time, Vance Stream grew from a garage-based concept to a multinational corporation currently valued at approximately $300 million, with an anticipated post-IPO valuation approaching $1 billion. He paused, letting the numbers hang in the air, immense and impressive. "Mrs. Vance, are you a software engineer?" "No." "Are you a marketing expert, a sales strategist?" "No." "Did you ever hold a position, official or unofficial, within Vance Stream? Did you write a single line of code? Did you negotiate a single client contract? Did you design a single element of the user interface?" "I did not," I replied. Marcus scoffed audibly, finally looking up from his phone. He shook his head, sharing a private joke with the air. "She doesn't even know how to reset the router, Harrison. Let's keep this moving." Stone held up a placating hand toward his client, though his expression was one of indulgent agreement. "So," Stone continued, turning his granite gaze back to me, "you admit that the intellectual property, the business acumen, the vision, and the labor that built this fortune were entirely and solely provided by Mr. Vance." I paused. I let the silence stretch for a beat, 2 beats. I thought about the memories that flooded in, unbidden, not of boardrooms or code, but of a dim garage lit by a single halogen lamp. I saw Marcus, pale and trembling with exhaustion, passed out on a stained futon, a cold cup of noodles beside him. I saw myself covering him with a blanket, then sitting at the rickety desk to finish formatting his investor pitch deck because his hands were shaking too badly to use the mouse. I saw the pre-dawn drives to the post office to mail physical prototypes because he was too paranoid about digital leaks. I felt the weight of the 2 years where my librarian's salary, every check, every freelance archival stipend, had paid our rent, our electricity, our groceries, and crucially, the monthly server hosting bill for Vance Stream's embryonic website. His income during that time had been exactly 0. "I admit," I said carefully, choosing each word as if it were a stepping stone across a river of lies, that I did not write the proprietary code. I managed the domestic sphere so that Mr. Vance could focus on his work without distraction. Stone laughed. It was a practiced, dismissive sound meant to shrivel my statement into something pathetic. The domestic sphere, he repeated, rolling the words as if they were a foreign and ridiculous concept. You mean you did the laundry, you made the coffee, Mrs. Vance. In the state of Washington, we look at equitable contribution. My client is prepared to argue that your contribution was, in the context of building a 9-figure enterprise, negligible. In fact, he is arguing that you were a net financial drain. He picked up another document. Did Mr. Vance pay off your student loans approximately 2 years ago? He did, I acknowledged. A sum of $5,200, correct? Yes. And did he purchase the vehicle you currently drive? He bought the Honda Civic used for me, yes. And the clothes on your back? Stone gestured vaguely at my outfit, the same simple, off-the-rack gray suit I'd worn to a dozen job interviews 5 years ago. Did his income provide for your lifestyle, your maintenance during the last 3 years of the marriage? Yes, I said. Stone leaned back in his chair, the leather sighing. He steepled his fingers, a portrait of satisfied logic. So, to summarize, you brought no assets into the marriage. You contributed no specialized skill to the business that is the primary marital asset. You lived, by your own admission, off the fruits of his success, and now that the marriage is ending, you feel entitled to what the law might consider an equitable portion of that success. Is that a fair characterization? Arthur Penhaligon cleared his throat. It was a dry, dusty sound, like pages turning in a forgotten book. Mr. Stone, he murmured, not looking up from the legal pad where he was doodling what appeared to be a detailed sketch of a seabird. Is there a question in that oration, or are you simply auditioning for a courtroom drama? The witness is here to answer questions, not to listen to your closing argument. Stone's eyes snapped to Arthur, a flash of irritation breaking his cool facade. He didn't like being interrupted, especially by someone he so clearly considered a relic. The question is simple, Stone bit out. On what grounds does the witness believe she deserves a settlement? I looked past Stone, past the smirking junior associates, straight at Marcus. He was watching me now, his expression one of open contempt. I am the wife, I said, my voice cutting through the tension before Arthur could formulate a legalistic response. That is the grounds. Marcus muttered something, but he didn't bother to lower his voice. The court reporter's fingers fluttered, capturing it. A wife, he said, the word dripping with sarcasm, more like a squatter with a ring. From the corner, Tiffany failed to suppress a giggle, quickly turning it into a cough. Stone shuffled his papers, a signal that the soft warm-up was over. Let's move to assets. We need to establish your current financial standing to determine if you have the means to support yourself without spousal support, which we intend to oppose vigorously regardless. He fixed me with a stare. Mrs. Vance. Other than the personal items in your possession, clothing, toiletries, that sort of thing, do you have any bank accounts, stocks, bonds, or real estate holdings in your name? The room went still. This was the precipice. The junior associate stopped typing. Arthur set down his pen. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the table, a hunter sensing a wounded animal's trail. I looked at Arthur. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't instruction, it was permission. I have a checking account with roughly $800 in it, I said. Anything else? Stone pressed, his tone bored, already dismissing this pittance. Any savings accounts, any hidden accounts, any inheritance sitting in a vault somewhere. We've run a credit check, Mrs. Vance, you're a ghost. You have a respectable credit score of 720 and a debt-to-income ratio that suggests you live just above the poverty line. So I'll ask again, do you possess, or are you the beneficiary of, any assets valued at over $10,000 that you have not disclosed? I held his gaze. I am the beneficiary of a family trust. Marcus couldn't contain himself. He let out a loud, derisive laugh that echoed off the glass. "Oh, for God's sake, here we go, the family trust. She's been mumbling about her grandpa's legacy for years." "It's a punchline, Harrison. It's probably a collection of antique stamps or a rotting cabin in the woods. Don't waste the billable hours." Stone smirked, sharing the joke with his client. "We have to be thorough, Marcus." He turned back to me, his patience visibly thinning. "Mrs. Vance, what is the approximate value of this trust?" I folded my hands in my lap. "I have not had it formally appraised recently. Is it worth more than $5,000? Yes. More than 50,000? Yes." Stone rolled his eyes, a dramatic gesture for the record. "Fine. We will demand full disclosure of this so-called trust in the discovery phase, but let the record show that the witness is being evasive about what is, in all likelihood, a trivial amount." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a condescending murmur. "We are talking about a company approaching $1 billion valuation, Mrs. Vance. Unless your grandfather was a Rockefeller, your little trust fund is a rounding error. It is irrelevant to the scale of the lifestyle you are attempting to claim a right to." I met his gaze, my expression neutral. "I understand your position, Mr. Stone." "Good," he snapped, slamming a folder shut with finality. "Then we're done here. My client has a flight to catch. We'll see you in court, Mrs. Vance, and bring your checkbook. We're going to sue you for our legal fees." The deposition was declared over. The court reporter stopped her machine. The associates began packing away their laptops. Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish of finality. He walked around the table, pausing just inches from my chair. He leaned down, his expensive citrus and sandalwood cologne enveloping me, a scent I had once chosen for him. It now smelled like betrayal. "You should have taken the $1,000, Bella," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. The court reporter was out of earshot. "This was just for me. Now you're going to end up not just penniless, but in debt. I'm going to make sure the judge knows exactly what you are, a nobody." He straightened up, gave Arthur a dismissive nod, and strode out of the conference room. Tiffany scrambled to follow him, already tapping out a triumphant text on her phone. Arthur waited until the door hissed shut behind them. He slowly, meticulously, packed his unused pipe back into his pocket. He looked at me, his ancient eyes thoughtful. "He called you a nobody," Arthur mused, as if examining a curious insect. "He did," I said, staring at the empty doorway where Marcus's silhouette had vanished. "The mandatory financial disclosure deadline is in 48 hours, Arthur said, gathering his own few papers. "I will file the complete and verified documents regarding the Sterling Hargrave Sovereign Trust tomorrow morning. But I'll request they be sealed for the judge's eyes only until the morning of the hearing. No need to spoil the surprise prematurely. Let's let Mr. Vance enjoy his weekend of supreme confidence." I stood up. The obsidian table reflected a distorted version of myself, a woman in a cheap suit, back straight, head held high. I felt lighter than I had in years, as if a great, suffocating weight had been lifted, only to be replaced by the cold, clean burden of inevitability. "He thinks he's fighting a mouse, Arthur," I said softly. Arthur Penhaligon smiled then, a true smile that reached his eyes and made them glitter like chips of ice. "Yes," he said, "and he's about to step on a landmine." The following Monday, the day of the preliminary hearing, the Seattle sky was a uniform sheet of bruised purple, pressing down on the city with the promise of a violent storm. The King County Superior Court building, a neoclassical monument to sober justice, was buzzing with an unusual energy. The impending IPO of Vance Stream had turned the divorce of its CEO into a juicy sidebar for the financial press. A small scrum of reporters and camera operators lined the marble hallway outside Department 12, their voices a low, anticipatory hum. Marcus arrived first, as was his style. He made an entrance. He wore a navy blue suit that was so perfectly tailored it seemed painted on, no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone, a calculated signal that he was a disruptor, a man unbound by old-world formalities. He walked with the easy swagger of someone who believed the world was his podium. Harrison Stone marched beside him, a grim-faced consigliere, and a few steps behind, playing her part to perfection, was Tiffany. She had been coached. She wore a modest cream-colored dress, her makeup understated, her demeanor somber. She was playing the role of the supportive, concerned friend, a pillar of strength during a difficult personal time. I knew the narrative, the hardworking genius, burdened by a gold-digging, idle wife finding solace in a loyal colleague. I entered through a side door, avoiding the gauntlet. I wore the same gray suit, it was my armor now. I carried a battered leather folder that had belonged to my father. Arthur Penhilligan was at my side, moving slower today, leaning on an elegant cane of Malacca wood. He looked every one of his 70-plus years, a frail, old-world gentleman seemingly out of his depth in this brutal, modern arena. The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax, old paper, and human anticipation. The gallery was a mix of curious onlookers, a few board law students, and several stone-faced men in excellent suits who I recognized as minor Vance Stream investors and board members. They were here to see if their golden goose was going to be plucked. All rise. The bailiff's voice echoed off the high ceilings. The Honorable Judge Beverly Halloway swept into the room, her black robes flowing. She was a woman in her late 50s with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. She had a reputation for zero tolerance for theatrics, for cutting through legal posturing to the cold heart of a matter. She took her seat on the high bench and peered over her glasses at the two parties before her, a queen surveying a disputed territory. Case number 49021, Vance versus Vance, Judge Halloway stated, her voice crisp and clear. We are here for opening statements and to rule on the petitioner's motion for summary judgment regarding the validity of the prenuptial agreement and the preliminary division of assets. Counsel for the petitioner, you may begin. Harrison Stone stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a practiced tug, a gladiator readying for combat. He walked to the podium, commanding the space with his presence. Your Honor, he began, his voice a rich, persuasive instrument, we are here today to correct a mistake. A mistake made by a brilliant, passionate young man who fell in love and in the process was taken advantage of. My client, Marcus Vance, is a visionary. He has built from literal nothing a company that employs thousands, that creates value, that drives innovation. And while he was toiling 18-hour days, sacrificing his health, his youth, his very well-being to build this engine of the future, he turned and pointed a blunt finger directly at me. What was the respondent doing? He paused, letting the question hang. The gallery leaned forward. She was waiting, Stone said, his voice dropping to a confidential, disgusted tone, waiting for the payout. The respondent, Isabella Vance, has contributed nothing to the marital estate. She brought no assets into the marriage. She generated no income during the marriage. She existed entirely on the generosity and hard work of my client. And now, on the eve of his greatest professional achievement, she seeks to disrupt a billion-dollar initial public offering by demanding a share of a company she doesn't understand, couldn't run, and didn't help build. The narrative was clean, compelling, and vicious, the genius and the leech. I could feel the eyes of the gallery on me, evaluating, judging. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge's bench, my face a calm mask. We are asking this court, Stone continued, his voice rising again, to enforce the prenuptial agreement to the letter. We are asking that the respondent be granted zero alimony, and frankly, Your Honor, we are asking for more. We are asking for damages. The emotional and professional stress this frivolous, grasping litigation has placed on Mr. Vance on the eve of his company's IPO is significant. We want to send a message. a message that you cannot simply marry into success, contribute nothing, and expect a free ride for life. He sat down, looking triumphantly at Marcus. Marcus gave him a slight, regal nod. The message was clear. The first blow had been struck, and it was devastating. Judge Holloway's expression remained unreadable. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, turning her gaze to our table. Arthur stood up slowly with a slight grunt of effort. He did not walk to the podium. He remained at our table, leaning heavily on his cane, a picture of old-fashioned civility. "Your Honor," he began, his voice a gentle, mumbling contrast to Stone's sonorous boom. "My client, Isabella, is a very private person. She is not a person given to spectacle." He gestured vaguely toward Stone's side of the room. "She did not marry Mr. Vance for his money. In fact, when they met, Mr. Vance was, what is the term the young people use? Couch surfing. He was a man with a dream and a laptop, and she loved him for it." A faint, derisive snort came from Marcus's direction. Arthur ignored it. "We do not contest," Arthur continued, his voice gaining a faint, staly thread, "that Mr. Vance built his company. We contest the characterization of my client as a financial burden. Mr. Stone calls her a leech. He claims she has no assets. He claims she is desperate for Mr. Vance's money." Arthur paused, a long, deliberate silence. He reached into his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a single, thick document bound in blue cardstock. "We have filed the mandatory financial affidavit this morning, as ordered by the court." "Your Honor," he said, looking up at the judge, "I believe the clerk has just placed it on your bench." Judge Holloway looked down. She picked up the blue-bound document. It looked innocuous, a standard court filing. "I have it here," she said. "Mr. Stone was very insistent during the deposition," Arthur said, and now his voice lost all its frailty. It became sharp, precise, a scalpel being drawn from a velvet sheath. "He was adamant. He wanted to know if my client had assets over $5,000. He mocked her for mentioning a family trust. He claimed that, compared to Mr. Vance's billions, his anticipated billions, she was a nobody, a ghost." Arthur looked directly at Marcus now, and his gaze was no longer that of a confused old man. It was the gaze of an executioner who knows the blade is sharp. "We are happy to grant Mr. Vance his divorce. In fact, we agree wholeheartedly that the financial entanglements should be severed immediately, because, Your Honor, my client does not need Mr. Vance's money." He let the sentence hang. The courtroom was utterly silent. She never did. Judge Holloway flipped open the blue document. Her eyes began to scan the first summary page, then they stopped. She blinked once, twice. A faint frown line appeared between her brows. She adjusted her glasses, leaning closer to the paper. She turned a page, then another. The silence stretched, becoming thick, oppressive, electric. The only sound was the rustle of paper under the judge's fingers. Judge Holloway, a woman renowned for her stoic, implacable demeanor, looked up from the papers. Her expression had undergone a profound transformation. The neutral mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unvarnished shock, followed swiftly by a dawning, deep respect. She looked from the document to me, sitting calmly at the table, and back again. "Mr. Penhaligon," the judge said, and her voice sounded strange, hushed. "Is this verified, certified by the auditing firm of Deloitte Touche Tomatsu and by the Swiss Federal Banking Commission, Your Honor?" Arthur said, his voice ringing clear in the silent room. "The supporting documents, all 9 volumes, are available for the court's inspection." "Mr. Stone," Judge Holloway said, turning her now piercing gaze to the other counsel table, "have you or your client seen a copy of the respondent's financial disclosure?" Stone stood up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "No, Your Honor, we only just received it. We assumed it contained the usual, a checking account balance, perhaps the title to a used vehicle. Given the respondent's demonstrated lack of means, we did not feel it necessary to review it in detail prior to opening statements." I suggest, Judge Holloway said, and her voice was now dripping with a frost that could have chilled the room, that you approach the bench and take a copy. Now, a ripple of confusion went through the gallery. Stone's frown deepened, but he obeyed. He walked to the bench, took the copy of the blue document from the clerk, and walked back to his table, his demeanor one of barely contained impatience. "What is it?" Marcus hissed, leaning toward him. "What does she have, some stupid inheritance?" Stone didn't answer. He opened the file. His eyes, practiced at scanning financial statements, went straight to the bottom line on the summary page, and then he froze completely, his shoulders locked, his breath hitched audibly. The color drained from his face so rapidly it was as if a plug had been pulled. He went from ruddy confidence to a sickly, ashen gray in the space of 3 seconds. "Harrison," Marcus asked, the first thread of real panic weaving into his voice. "What is it?" Stone looked at Marcus. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with something that looked very much like terror. He had the expression of a man who has just realized he is standing on the tracks with the lights of an oncoming train blinding him. "You idiot," Stone whispered, but he had forgotten to cover his microphone. The 2 words, low and venomous, were picked up and amplified, echoing through the dead-silent courtroom. "What?" Marcus snapped louder. "She's not broke," Stone hissed, his voice trembling, his hands gripping the edges of the document so tightly the paper crumpled. "Marcus, she's a Sterling. Do you have any idea who the Sterlings are?" "So she has some old family money," Marcus said, his voice rising in frustration and dawning fear. "1 million, 2 million, so what? It's a drop in the bucket." Stone shoved the paper under Marcus's nose, his finger jabbing at a line of type. "Look at the number, Marcus. Don't look at the words, just look at the zeros." Marcus looked, his eyes, so used to seeing his own company's valuation, scan the figure. For a second there was no comprehension, then his brain processed it. Net worth estimate, $42 billion, $40 to billion. Marcus Vance, the tech genius, the disruptor, the man who believed with every fiber of his being that he was the richest, most powerful person in this room, in this city, stared at the paper. His company, his life's work, his ticket to immortality was worth $300 million. On its very best day, after a flawless IPO, it might kiss $1 billion. The woman he had mocked for wearing a faded cardigan, the woman he had tried to give $1,000 for a motel room, the nobody he was trying to evict from his life and his finances, was worth 40 times more than he could ever realistically hope to be. His mouth opened, no sound came out. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. The universe had just inverted itself. This can't be real," Marcus stammered, the words a dry croak. "It is real," Arthur Penhaligon said from across the aisle. He wasn't shouting, he didn't need to. The courtroom was a vacuum and his voice filled it. "And since your client filed a motion claiming the marriage was fraudulent and based on financial deception, and since he demanded a strict enforcement of equitable division based solely on his own contributions," Arthur smiled. It was the smile of a chess master delivering checkmate. "We are countersuing, Your Honor. Not for alimony, for defamation. And since Mr. Vance was so insistent that all assets generated during the marriage be subject to the most rigorous scrutiny regarding contribution, we feel compelled to point out a detail. We would like to audit Vance Stream's earliest financial records because it appears Mr. Vance used a shared marital checking account, an account funded almost exclusively by my client's so-called poverty wages as a librarian, to pay for the initial server hosting fees for his company's website in 2018. Arthur turned to address the judge directly. "Technically, Your Honor, Isabella Sterling funded the seed round. She paid to keep the lights on, literally." The judge looked from Arthur's calm face to Marcus's horrified one. "Mr. Stone," she said, her voice now carrying a note of something that sounded almost like pity, though it was ice cold, "it appears your client has inadvertently opened the door to a claim of commingling of funds. if Mrs. Vance paid the electric bill that powered the servers that hosted the proprietary code, she may very well own a piece of that code. This is a factual dispute that renders summary judgment on the prenuptial agreement entirely inappropriate. Marcus finally found his voice. It was a strangled, desperate thing. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a horrifying cocktail of shock, greed, and utter humiliation. "Bella," he breathed. I was finally looking at him. My face was calm, serene, and in its stillness, utterly terrifying. "I told you, Marcus," I said softly, and in the silent room my voice carried to every corner, clear as a bell. "I told you I would leave with exactly what I came with, but you insisted on dragging me here. You insisted on this." Marcus felt the walls of the courtroom close in. The air grew thin. He looked at Tiffany. She was no longer smirking. She was staring at me with her mouth slightly agape, the gears in her head visibly turning, recalculating her entire world, her future, her loyalties. "We need a recess," Stone shouted, his famed composure shattering. He was on his feet, his voice ragged. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to confer with our client. This is new information." Judge Holloway brought her gavel down with a sharp crack. "Recess granted, 15 minutes. She peered over her glasses at Harrison Stone, and for the first time, a very slight, very cold smile touched her lips. "I suggest you use the time wisely, counsel. You seem to have stepped into something of a bear trap." The heavy oak door of the defendant's consultation room slammed shut, cutting off the rising tide of noise from the gallery. The shocked murmurs, the frantic clicks of reporters texting their editors, the low hum of a scandal igniting in real time. Inside the small, airless room, the silence was total and suffocating. Harrison Stone stood with his back to the door for a long moment, his shoulders rigid. Then, with a violent, unprofessional motion, he ripped at the knot of his silk tie, loosening it as if it were choking him. He slumped into one of the cheap vinyl chairs, the picture of a man whose entire legal strategy had just been vaporized. He dropped his forehead into his hands, his fingers pressing white against his temples. Marcus paced the confined space like a caged animal, his expensive shoes squeaking on the linoleum. His face was a ghastly shade of pale, a fine sheen of sweat making his skin gleam under the fluorescent lights. His mind was a riot of conflicting impulses, disbelief, a searing, white-hot humiliation, and beneath it all, a swift, viperous threat of avarice. 42 billion, Marcus whispered, the number a sacred, terrifying incantation. He stopped pacing and whirled to face Stone. "Harrison, look at me. Did you see that number? Is it real? Can it possibly be real? There has to be a mistake, a decimal point in the wrong place." Stone lifted his head. The look he gave Marcus was not one of legal counsel, but of pure, unadulterated pity. It was more devastating than any anger. "It's certified by Deloitte and the Swiss, Marcus. It's real. The Sterling family. God, I should have seen it. The media calls them the Invisible Empire. They haven't given an interview since the Gilded Age. I didn't connect the dots. Sterling is a common enough name. I thought she was a nobody from some forgotten Midwestern lineage. But she's a billionaire," Marcus said, and a strange, manic grin began to twitch at the corners of his mouth. The shock was metabolizing, twisting into a different kind of frenzy. "Harrison, think, she's my wife. We're still married. That means I'm entitled to a share, right? Washington is a community property state. If we drop the prenup argument, if we position this as a true partnership." Stone cut him off with a harsh, barking laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor. "You idiot, did you not read the header on the trust documents? It's a sovereign trust, it's inheritance received during the marriage but kept meticulously separate. In virtually every jurisdiction, inheritance is separate property, Marcus. You can't touch a dime of it unless she commingled it with marital assets." Did she? Marcus's mind raced, sifting through 5 years of financial minutiae he had largely ignored because he had deemed it beneath him. I don't know. Our joint account, she put her paychecks in there for bills, her paychecks from her job," Stone snapped. That's her income, which becomes community property. But that's a pittance. Did she ever transfer funds from a Sterling Trust account into your joint checking? Did she buy the penthouse with inheritance money? Did she invest a single cent of that fortune into Vance Stream? The truth dawned on Marcus, a cold, sickening realization. No, he whispered. No, I was careful about that. I wanted the company to be mine. I wanted the credit. I made sure she kept her finances simple. You played yourself, Stone said, his voice flat with disgust. You were so obsessed with keeping your money separate, with making her live on her librarian wages to prove some point, that you forced her to keep her colossal fortune in a pristine, legally untouchable vault. If you had treated her like a partner, if you'd let her buy the penthouse or fund the Series A round, you'd have a claim. But because you treated her like a pauper you were graciously allowing to sleep in your bed, her money is perfectly insulated. You built the wall yourself. Marcus slammed his fist against the cinderblock wall, a dull, meaty thud. There has to be a way. She loved me. This is a test, right? A final, twisted test to see if I wanted her for her, not her money. She's punishing me for Tiffany, for the divorce. I can fix this. I can explain. The door opened abruptly and Tiffany slipped in, her face ashen. She was clutching her phone like a lifeline. Marcus, she said, her voice trembling, it's everywhere. What is? He snarled, not looking at her. Billionaire wife is trending, #1 globally on Twitter. People, they found old society photos. Her at the Met Gala a decade ago, masked, listed as Isabella Sterling debutante. The Wall Street Journal just put out an alert. And the investors, Marcus, her voice broke. The board is blowing up my phone. Sequoia, Goldman, they're asking why the CEO is in a divorce battle with the heir to the Sterling Hargrave fortune. Goldman's lead on the IPO just said they're pausing to assess reputational risk. They're talking about suspending the roadshow. Marcus felt the floor lurch beneath him. The blood drained from his face so completely he had to grasp the back of a chair to steady himself. No, they can't do that. The roadshow starts Thursday. We have commitments. I need that IPO. I'm leveraged to the hilt on the anticipation. The margin loans, the personal guarantees. We need to settle, Stone said, pushing himself to his feet. The lawyer was back, but it was a lawyer in full damage control mode. We need to go back in there and beg. We need to withdraw every motion, apologize profusely, and agree to whatever terms she wants, hoping she'll be merciful. Beg, Marcus sneered, the old arrogance flaring like a dying star. I don't beg, especially not to her. You do today, Stone said, his voice grim and final. Because right now, Marcus, you are a minnow who just discovered he's been swimming in a tank with a leviathan. If she wants to, she can buy your company out of her petty cash fund just to shut it down for fun. She can buy the building that houses my law firm and have me evicted by lunchtime. Do you understand the scale of money we are talking about? She has changed the weather money. You have Lisa Porsche money. This is not a fight. This is an annihilation. Marcus took a deep, shuddering breath. He ran a hand through his perfectly tousled hair. He straightened his suit jacket, the fabric now feeling like a cheap costume. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of the room's smoked glass window. He practiced his smile, the one that had charmed venture capitalists and magazine cover photographers. It looked grotesque now, a rictus grin of panic. Get her in here, Marcus commanded, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. Just her, without the lawyers, just husband and wife. We can talk. I can make her understand. She won't agree to that, Stone said, weary. She will, Marcus insisted, the ghost of his old manipulative confidence returning. She's Bella. She spent 5 years washing my socks and listening to me talk about APIs. She's obsessed with me. This whole thing, it's a cry for attention, a tantrum. I can fix this. Get her in here. 5 minutes later, the door opened again, but it wasn't just Isabella. Arthur Penhaligon walked in with her, a silent, tweed-clad sentinel. Behind them, lingering in the hallway, were two large, impassive men in impeccably tailored suits who radiated an aura of quiet, professional menace, private security. Not the brash, uniformed kind, but the kind that whispers and makes problems disappear. Isabella entered, and the very atmosphere in the shabby room shifted. She didn't look like the gray mouse from the deposition anymore. She didn't even look like the calm woman at the defendant's table. She held herself with a stillness that was both regal and terrifying. She was a queen who had deigned to enter the scullery to pass judgment. She remained standing near the door. "You wanted to speak?" she asked. Her voice was neutral, devoid of any emotion, no anger, no triumph, no pity. Marcus took a step forward, his hands spread in a gesture of supplication. "Bella, baby, look." He forced his voice into the warm, intimate register he used to use when he wanted something. "This has all gotten so out of hand. Lawyers, courts, financial disclosures, this isn't us. This isn't who we are. I know I've been stressed. The IPO pressure, the board, it made me crazy. I said things I didn't mean. I did things, but I never stopped loving you." He took another step, closing the distance. Isabella didn't retreat. She simply watched him, her eyes like chips of polished obsidian. "I was hurt," Marcus pleaded, his eyes wide and shining with manufactured sincerity. "I was hurt that you were so distant, so secretive, and now I know why. You were carrying this huge, incredible secret, this burden. Why didn't you tell me? We could have been a team, a real team. We could have built an empire the world has never seen. We still can." He reached for her hand. One of the security men in the hallway shifted his weight, but Isabella held up a single, imperious finger, stopping him without even looking. She let Marcus take her hand. His skin was damp and cold. "We can drop all of this," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a husky, confidential whisper, his eyes locking onto hers, trying to find the Bella he remembered, the one who would melt under his gaze. "I'll fire Tiffany. Today, she means nothing. She was just a distraction, a stupid mistake I made when I felt alone. I'll send her away. It's you and me, Bella, Vance and Sterling. Imagine it, just imagine the power." In the corner, Tiffany let out a small, wounded gasp. "Marcus, what?" Marcus didn't even glance her way. "Get out, Tiffany," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. "Can't you see I'm talking to my wife?" Tiffany stood frozen, humiliation flushing her cheeks a blotchy red. The calculation in her eyes died, replaced by a raw, startled hurt. She fumbled for her bag, her movements clumsy, and fled the room without another word, the door swinging shut behind her. Marcus turned his full attention back to Isabella, his smile returning, brighter now. "See, she's gone, it's over, it was nothing. Let's talk about us. Let's talk about the future, a real future." Isabella slowly, deliberately, pulled her hand from his grasp. She reached into the pocket of her simple suit jacket and withdrew a single, folded sanitizing wipe from a small packet. In the dead silence of the room, the crinkle of the plastic was deafening. She unfolded it and methodically wiped the palm of her hand where he had touched her, her movements precise, clinical, and utterly devastating. "You really are a cliché, Marcus," she said softly, dropping the used wipe into a small wastebasket by the door. "I thought you might have some dignity left. I thought you might choose to fight me with whatever shred of pride you had, but you're just a prostitute. And not even an expensive one." Marcus's face flushed a deep, furious crimson. "Now wait a goddamn minute." "No," Isabella snapped, and her voice cracked through the air like a whip. All pretense of neutrality vanished, replaced by a glacial, controlled fury. "You wait. You think this is about money. You think I revealed the trust because I want to share it with you, to play power couple. I revealed it to show you how small you are, to show you the scale of your error." She took a step toward him, and he unconsciously took a step back, bumping against the table. "You are the CEO of a multinational tech company," she continued, her tone scathing. "You are the manager of a glorified website. A website that, I might add, currently has a cloud of securities fraud hanging over it because of your own petty, stupid lies to the court today. I will destroy you, Marcus hissed, his mask finally shattering completely, raw malice spilling out. I will go to the press. I will tell them you're a liar, a manipulator. I will paint you as a psychotic heiress who sabotaged her husband's life's work out of spite. Arthur Penhaligon cleared his throat. It was a dry, academic sound. Actually, Mr. Vance, before you make any further public statements, we should perhaps discuss the fraud, the actual fraud. Stone, who had been watching the exchange in stunned silence, jerked to attention. What are you talking about? Arthur opened the leather folder he carried. We mentioned the commingling of funds earlier, a trivial matter, really, but during your client's rather theatrical deposition, he mocked my client for her poverty. He claimed he paid for everything. However, in our audit of the earliest Vance Stream records, the records your client was so eager to have scrutinized for contribution, we found a fascinating discrepancy. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of a bank statement from 6 years ago. The account name, Isabella Sterling. The balance, $1,243.87. In the fall of 2018, Arthur explained, his voice as calm as a lecturer's. During the fabled garage phase, Mr. Vance's personal credit cards were maxed out. The server hosting bill for the prototype of Vance Stream, the very architecture that held the proprietary code, was due. It was $49.99 per month. A pittance, but if that bill had not been paid, the data would have been wiped. The company in any recognizable form would have ceased to exist before it began. Marcus stared at the paper. A line was highlighted, GoDaddy.com $49.99. I paid that bill, Isabella said, her voice cutting through the quiet, for 6 consecutive months, out of my library wages. Because you were on the floor of that garage, crying, saying you were ruined, that it was all over, so I paid it. So what? Marcus spat, a desperate defiance in his eyes. It's a few $100. I'll write you a check right now with interest. It's a loan, a friendly loan. It's not the amount, Mr. Vance, Arthur said, his eyes glinting behind his spectacles. It's the legal principle and, more importantly, the timing. That payment preserved the sole marital asset of any consequence, the intellectual property, at its most vulnerable inception. In the state of Washington, that kind of commingling of marital funds, her income, to preserve a marital asset creates a community property interest in that asset, a lien, if you will. Stone had gone very pale. He understood where this was heading immediately. It was a trap within a trap, but more importantly, Arthur continued, you never disclosed this to your investors. In your S-1 filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission for your initial public offering, you signed a warranty. You warranted under penalty of perjury that you were the sole creator and owner of the company's intellectual property, free of any liens, claims, or encumbrances. Arthur let the words hang in the air. The room seemed to grow colder. But you weren't, Isabella finished, her voice calm and deadly. Your wife was funding the operational infrastructure that kept it alive. That is a material misstatement, a fraud on the investors. You can't, Marcus whispered, the blood draining from his face again. His knees felt weak. You can't go to the SEC. That will kill the IPO. The stock, it'll be worthless. The company will be sued into oblivion. I know, Isabella said, a faint, chilling smile touching her lips for the first time. And since I have $42 billion, I don't really care about the stock price of a doomed tech startup. I can afford to watch it burn. I can afford to buy the ashes. Marcus looked from her implacable face to Arthur's stern one, to Stone's horrified expression. He was drowning, and the life raft he had tried to grasp had turned into an anchor. What do you want? He asked, his voice hollow, broken. All arrogance was gone. This was the sound of utter surrender. Just tell me what you want, name it. Isabella leaned in close, so close he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, eyes he once claimed to love. Her voice was a soft, venomous whisper meant only for him. I want you to admit it on the record in open court. I want you to stand up in front of the judge, in front of the press, in front of your investors, and admit that you are a fraud, that you lied, that I supported you, that without me you are nothing. I want you to say the words yourself. I can't do that, Marcus choked out. It will ruin me, my reputation, it's all I have. Isabella straightened up, her expression cooling back into indifference. She turned to Arthur. Then we go to the SEC and we call the Wall Street Journal. I believe they'd be very interested in the warranty clause in the Vance Stream S1. She turned toward the door. Wait, Marcus screamed, the sound raw and animalistic. Isabella paused, her hand on the doorknob, but she didn't turn around. I'll do it, he whispered, the fight gone out of him completely. He sagged against the table, a marionette with its strings cut. I'll say whatever you want. The courtroom, when they returned, was more packed than before. The news had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. The gallery was now standing room only, and the press section had doubled. The air buzzed with a frantic, disbelieving energy. The story was no longer a juicy divorce, it was a financial meteor strike. Marcus walked in, led by a ashen-faced Harrison Stone. He looked like a man marching to his own execution, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor. The confident tech titan was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. Judge Holloway took the bench, her expression unreadable but her gaze sharp as she observed the change in the petitioner's demeanor. We are back on the record. Mr. Stone, I trust you have used the recess productively. Stone stood, looking older and wearier. We have, Your Honor. The petitioner wishes to address the court. Very well, Mr. Vance, you may speak. Marcus stood up. His hands were shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the cameras in the back, and he knew that every investor, every board member, every person he had ever tried to impress was watching this live feed. This was the end of everything he had built. Your Honor, he began, his voice a barely audible croak. He cleared his throat, tried again. I wish to withdraw my motion for summary judgment. Speak up, Mr. Vance, Judge Holloway commanded, her voice echoing in the silent room. I withdraw the motion, Marcus said, louder, the words tasting like ash, and I would like to amend my petition. Isabella sat perfectly still, her hands folded on the table. Arthur gave a slight, approving nod beside her. Go on, the judge said. I admit, Marcus said, forcing the words out, each one a physical agony, that the respondent, Isabella Vance, was instrumental in the founding and early survival of Vance Stream. A collective, sharp gasp went up from the gallery. I admit that during the early years when I had no income, she supported the household financially and paid for critical infrastructure that kept the company alive. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. The claim that she contributed nothing was incorrect. Incorrect. Isabella's voice, clear and cold, rang out. She wasn't asking, she was directing. Marcus closed his eyes. A single tear traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. He opened them and looked at the judge. It was a lie, he whispered. Then louder, forcing it out, I lied. She saved me multiple times. And the prenuptial agreement? Arthur Penhaligon asked, rising to his feet. We move to void it, Marcus said, the last of his resistance crumbling. It is invalid. It was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Very well, Judge Holloway said, making a note. The prenuptial agreement is voided by stipulation of the petitioner. Now, regarding the division of assets, Mr. Penhaligon. Actually, Your Honor, Arthur said, before we discuss division, we have one more witness to call. A rebuttal witness relevant to the current valuation of the primary marital asset Vance Stream. A witness, Stone blurted out, startled. We didn't agree to this. This is highly irregular. It is a rebuttal witness, Your Honor, Arthur said smoothly. Highly relevant to the court's determination of equitable distribution, given the petitioner's own focus on valuation. I'll allow it, Judge Holloway said, her curiosity evident. Call your witness. I call Mr. Jonathan Galt to the stand." The murmur that swept the courtroom this time was one of genuine shock, laced with a sudden, fearful respect. Jonathan Galt was a legend, not in the flashy Silicon Valley sense, but in the old money, carved-from-granite world of private equity. He was known as the Vulture for his ability to dismember overvalued companies with surgical precision. He was rarely seen in public and never in a divorce court. The side door opened and Galt entered. He was in his 60s with a full head of steel-gray hair and a face that looked hewn from cliff rock. He wore a black suit that was somehow both severe and impossibly expensive. He moved with the quiet, predatory confidence of a man who owned the room simply by entering it. He was sworn in and took the stand. "Mr. Galt," Arthur began, "you are an investor in Vance Stream, are you not?" "I was," Galt said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute attention. "My firm, Garrison Capital, held a 15% stake." "Was, past tense?" Arthur asked. "Yes," Galt said, his icy blue eyes sweeping over to Marcus, who shrank in his seat under that gaze. "We exited our position approximately 20 minutes ago." Marcus shot to his feet. "You can't do that, the lockup period, the agreements. There is a clause in our investment contract, Mr. Vance," Galt said, his voice cutting through Marcus's outburst like a knife. "The material misrepresentation and moral turpitude clause. It states that if the founder or CEO is found to have materially misrepresented the company's origins, ownership, or financial standing, thereby introducing catastrophic and irrevocable reputational risk, the lead investors may trigger an immediate sell-off, voiding any lockup provisions." He turned his gaze back to Arthur. "We triggered it, and we weren't alone. Sequoia Lightspeed, they're all out. The news of this hearing, of your client's admission that he lied about the foundational ownership of the IP, has made the company toxic. No underwriter will touch the IPO now. No sane investor will buy in. And what is the current valuation of Vance Stream?" Arthur asked, his tone clinical. Galt checked his watch, a simple platinum Patek Philippe, at 9 a.m. This morning, in anticipation of a successful IPO, the private market valuation was approximately $1.2 billion. He paused, letting the number resonate, then crushed it. "As of right now, the IPO has been canceled by the underwriters. The private valuation has collapsed. I'd say the company is worth the salvage value of its office furniture and the lease on its headquarters, perhaps $20 million on a generous day. It is, for all intents and purposes, worthless." The final word landed with the weight of a tombstone. Worthless. "So," Arthur said, turning to the judge, "the primary marital asset which the petitioner fought so hard to keep undiluted is essentially worthless. My client is willing to be magnanimous. She will waive any and all claim to half of nothing. Mr. Vance can keep 100% of the company." "I don't want it," Marcus screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. He was unraveling publicly, spectacularly. "It's ruined. You broke it. You bought it and you broke it." "You broke it, Marcus," Isabella said, her voice carrying clearly. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. "With your arrogance, with your lies, you built a house on a foundation of deceit. I merely pointed out the cracks." Judge Holloway looked down at Marcus with an expression that held not an ounce of sympathy. It was the look a judge reserves for those who have wasted the court's time and their own integrity. "Mr. Vance, it seems you have snatched a rather spectacular defeat from the jaws of victory." She picked up her gavel. "Given the petitioner's stipulations and the evidence presented, I am granting the divorce. I am upholding the validity of Mrs. Vance's, excuse me, Miss Sterling's, separate property, the Sterling Hargrave Trust. You, however, have admitted to commingling in the other direction, which, given the asset's devaluation, is now a moot point for division but remains a fact on the record." She brought the gavel down. Crack. "Judgment is entered. The parties are divorced." Each party shall retain their own assets as currently held. Miss Sterling keeps her trust. Mr. Vance keeps his company and its attendant debts and liabilities. She fixed Marcus with a final, piercing stare. And Mr. Vance, I am ordering you to pay the respondents reasonable legal fees. Mr. Penhaligon's time is valuable. I can't, Marcus sobbed, utterly broken, tears streaming down his face. I'm broke, the company accounts are frozen, the investors are gone, I have nothing. Then I suggest, Judge Halloway said coldly, gathering her papers, you find a job, court is adjourned. As the bailiff called all rise and the judge departed, the courtroom erupted into noise. Isabella stood up. She smoothed the front of her simple gray skirt. She picked up her father's leather folder. She did not look back at Marcus, who had collapsed into his chair, his body racked with silent sobs, Harrison Stone already packing his briefcase with hurried, embarrassed movements, putting physical distance between himself and his ruined client. She walked down the center aisle. The reporters shouted, a cacophony of questions that blended into a single roar of sound. Mrs. Vance, Miss Sterling, how does it feel? Will you take over the company? She stopped at the great oak doors of the courtroom. She turned not to the reporters but to the cameras, her gaze direct and unwavering. My name, she said, her voice clear, strong, and carrying the weight of generations, is Miss Sterling. A pause, and no, I won't be taking over the company. I prefer to invest in things with a future. She turned and pushed through the doors, Arthur a step behind her, the two security men falling in to flank them, cutting a path through the chaos in the hallway. She emerged into the cool, gray light of the afternoon. The threatened storm had broken and a clean, cold rain was washing the city. But as she stepped toward the waiting, unremarkable Honda Civic at the curb, she knew it wasn't over. The legal divorce was final. The financial annihilation was complete. But there was one more scene to this drama, one final, intimate reckoning that the courtroom could not provide. The loose end named Tiffany still dangled, and a heart, even one as hardened as Marcus' could still break in more than one way. The consequences were still falling, and the last piece had yet to land. The rain fell in steady, gray sheets, washing the courthouse steps clean of the day's ugliness. Arthur held a large black umbrella over us as we made our way to the curb. The shouts of the reporters were muffled by the downpour, their camera flashes like distant, impotent lightning. The car is just around the corner, Miss Sterling, Arthur said, his voice barely audible over the drumming on the umbrella. He meant the Rolls, the one with the opaque, bullet-resistant glass, and the driver who had been with my family for 30 years. No, I said, nodding toward my Honda Civic, parked defiantly at a meter a few feet away, a humble splash of blue in a sea of black town cars. I'll drive myself, I have one more stop to make. Arthur's wise old eyes studied me for a moment. He saw the finality in my expression, the last piece of resolve settling into place. He didn't ask for details, he simply nodded. Of course, I will be at the office if you need anything. The documents for the SEC will be ready for your signature by 5. He handed me the umbrella and, with a last protective glance, turned and melted into the stream of dark-suited lawyers and shell-shocked spectators pouring from the building. I stood alone for a moment under the canopy of silk and steel, the rain creating a private curtain around me. I got into the Honda. The familiar scent of old coffee, worn upholstery, and the pine tree air freshener I'd bought at a gas station 2 years ago enveloped me. It was the smell of my chosen life, the life I had built away from the gilded cage of the Sterling legacy. It felt more like home in that moment than the penthouse ever had. I started the engine, its faithful sputter a comforting sound, and pulled away from the curb, leaving the circus behind. I didn't drive toward Arthur's office, or to a hotel, or to any of the sterile, secure locations my wealth could provide. I drove through the slick, rain-smeared streets, past the gleaming towers of downtown, into the slightly shabbier, vibrant neighborhood where Vance Stream's headquarters stood. It was a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and polished concrete, a monument to Marcus's particular brand of aspirational chic. I parked across the street in a spot where I had a clear view of the main entrance. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes after the court had adjourned, a sleek black Uber SUV pulled up. The door flew open and Tiffany stumbled out. She was without an umbrella, her cream-colored dress instantly plastered to her skin by the rain, her carefully styled hair dissolving into dark, dripping strands around her face. She looked small, panicked, hunted. She fumbled with a keycard at the employee entrance, her hands shaking violently, before finally getting the door open and vanishing inside. I knew where she was going, to salvage what she could from her desk, to try and spin this to craft a narrative for her next interview. To grab the expensive ergonomic chair and the framed motivational print she'd paid for herself. I gave her 10 minutes, then I got out of the car. I didn't bother with the umbrella. I walked across the street, the cold rain soaking through my gray suit in seconds, plastering my own hair to my scalp. It felt clean, purifying. The electronic door was still slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the cavernous, silent lobby. The usual hum of activity was gone, replaced by a stunned, eerie quiet. A few employees huddled in clusters, speaking in hushed, frantic tones, their eyes wide with the news scrolling on their phones. They saw me, recognized me from the news feeds that were undoubtedly blazing across their screens. They fell silent, staring not with hostility but with a kind of awestruck horror. I ignored them. I knew the way. Past the empty reception desk, down the hallway lined with glass-walled conference rooms named after mountains Marcus had never climbed, to the corner office. Not Marcus's. His was larger, with a private terrace. This was the office of the VP of Public Relations. The door was closed. I didn't knock. Tiffany was on her knees behind her modern, white desk, yanking cords from a computer tower, stuffing a porcelain mug that said GIRLBOSS into a canvas tote bag. She jerked up as I entered, her face a mask of shock and streaked mascara. "Get out," she snarled, the bravado pathetic and thin. "You're not allowed in here, security." "I just saw them leaving," I said, my voice calm. I closed the door softly behind me. Along with most of the staff, I imagine. "The vultures are circling, but the rats are the first to flee a sinking ship, aren't they?" "You ruined everything," she spat, climbing to her feet, trying to muster dignity while soaked and disheveled. "No," I said, taking a step further into the room. It was decorated in the same cold, impersonal style as the penthouse, lots of white, sharp angles, a single piece of abstract art that meant nothing. "Marcus ruined everything. You were just a willing accessory, a cheap prop." Her face contorted with rage. "He loved me. He was going to leave you for me. He said you were a dead weight, a bore. He said I was his future." "He said a lot of things," I replied, moving to look out her window, which offered a less impressive view of a brick wall and an alley. "He said he loved me when he needed my paycheck to pay the server bills. He said he loved you when he needed his ego stroked and his image polished for the IPO. Now he has nothing, and he will have no one. Do you think he'll come looking for you now, Tiffany? Do you think he'll comfort you, build a life with you? Or will he blame you the way he blames everyone but himself?" I saw the truth of it hit her, the brutal, unvarnished reality piercing the fantasy she'd built. Her lower lip trembled. "He threw you out of that conference room like yesterday's trash," I continued, my tone conversational, almost gentle. "In front of me, in front of his lawyer. You were a bargaining chip, and he cashed you in without a second thought for a chance, however slim, at my money. You were never his future. You were a temporary distraction, a symptom of his sickness." Tiffany sank into her expensive desk chair, the fight draining out of her. She looked like a child playing dress-up in a ruined party gown. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want you to understand," I said, turning to face her fully. I want you to lie awake tonight and every night for a long time and understand the full cost of being the other woman. It's not just breaking a home. It's aligning yourself with a man of no character. It's tying your wagon to a star that was always a black hole. Your career in this city is finished. No reputable firm will touch you. You'll be a punchline. The girl who betrayed the billionaire who turned out to be the pauper. A raw, ragged sob escaped her. It was not a performance, it was the sound of a future disintegrating. You have one chance, I said, my voice hardening. Leave Seattle today. Change your name if you have to, go somewhere small and start over. And every time you're tempted to be flattered by a married man's attention, to believe his lies about his cruel wife, I want you to remember this room. This rain, this feeling. That is my gift to you. It's more mercy than you showed me. I didn't wait for a response. I had said what I came to say. I left her there, weeping in her decimated office, the hollow GIRLBOSS mug staring blankly from the tote bag. My final destination was not a place, but a person. I drove now to the old neighborhood, the one with the cracked sidewalks and the family-owned restaurants, the one where the garage had been. The rain had eased to a drizzle. I parked outside the unassuming storefront that now housed a pet groomer. The garage space was in the alley behind it. I walked down the alley. The dumpster was still there, rustier. The faded ghost of the Vance Stream logo, a stencil Marcus had painted with such pride one drunken night, was still barely visible on the corrugated metal door. I stood there, letting the memories wash over me, not with nostalgia, but with a forensic clarity. This was the site of the crime, not his crime of infidelity, but our shared crime of self-delusion. I had deluded myself that I could escape my name by loving a man who would never see me. He had deluded himself that he was a self-made god. A car door slammed nearby. I didn't need to turn. I knew the hesitant, shuffling footsteps. He stood at the mouth of the alley, silhouetted against the weak streetlight. Marcus. He was alone. His suit was rumpled, his hair a mess. He looked 10 years older. He held a bottle of cheap whiskey by the neck. I knew I'd find you here, he said, his voice slurred and thick. He took a swig from the bottle. Come to gloat, come to look at the scene of your great triumph. I turned to face him. There's no triumph here, Marcus, only ashes. It's all gone, he said, stumbling a few steps closer. The smell of alcohol and despair rolled off him. The board voted an hour ago. They removed me as CEO. The investors are filing a class action for fraud. My accounts are frozen. The penthouse, the bank is recalling the loan. He let out a wet, choked laugh. Tiffany won't answer my calls. You took everything. I didn't take a thing, I said, my voice steady in the damp alley air. You set it all on fire yourself. I just refuse to stand in the flames with you anymore. Why? He screamed suddenly, the sound echoing off the brick walls. He hurled the whiskey bottle. It shattered against the garage door, glass and brown liquid spraying. Why didn't you tell me? We could have had it all. We could have been the greatest power couple in the world. Why did you lie to me? The staggering irony of his question hung between us. I actually smiled, a small, cold movement of my lips. I did tell you, I said quietly. I told you I came from old money, that my family was comfortable. You never asked for details. You preferred your version, the poor little archivist you rescued. It fed your narrative. Your ego required a damsel in distress, not an equal. So that's what I became for you, and you grew to despise me for it. He stared at me, his brain, fogged by alcohol and ruin, struggling to process this. The foundation of his entire grievance was shifting, revealing itself to be sand. I loved the man who worked in this garage, I continued, gesturing to the stained door. I loved his passion, his desperation, his dream, but that man died a long time ago. He was replaced by a hollow man who loved only the reflection of his own success. And I will not mourn him. I am that man, he insisted, pounding a fist against his own chest. I'm still him. Bella, please, I'm broken. I have nothing. No one. You have to help me. You owe me that much. I owe you nothing, I said, and the finality in my voice extinguished the last flicker of hope in his eyes. You sought to destroy me in a court of law. You sought to brand me a fraud and a parasite. The court saw the truth. The world sees the truth. Our account is settled. I began to walk past him, back toward the alley's entrance, toward my car, toward the rest of my life. Where are you going? He called after me, his voice now just a broken whisper. I stopped but didn't turn. To live the life I was always meant to live, a life you were never going to be part of, even if I had told you everything on the day we met. You would have seen the fortune, not the woman. This way, at least, I got 5 years of believing it was real. Will I ever see you again? The question was pathetic, a child's question. Now I turned. I looked at him one last time, the ruined king of a worthless kingdom, standing in the rain in a dark alley, surrounded by the ghosts of his own ambition and the shattered glass of his last drink. No, Marcus, I said, you won't. I walked to my car. I did not look back. I got in, started the engine, and drove away from the alley, from the neighborhood, from the entire life I had built with him. The rain on the windshield blurred the world, washing it clean. A month later, the storm had passed. The Vance Stream bankruptcy proceedings were front-page news for a week, then became a cautionary footnote in business sections. Marcus Vance was subpoenaed by the SEC and named in multiple lawsuits. He sold his remaining assets, moved to another state, and disappeared from public view. A flash extinguished, leaving no real heat behind. I sit now in the library of the Hargrave estate in Surrey. It is not the largest of the properties, but it is my favorite. The room is all dark wood and green leather, smelling of beeswax and the petrichor from the gardens outside. A low fire crackles in the hearth, fighting off the English chill. On the desk before me are stacks of papers, Arthur's work. Plans for a new philanthropic foundation, investment strategies, the quiet, powerful work of stewardship. I am Isabella Sterling. The name fits me now. It is not a shackle, but a mantle I have chosen to pick up and wear with purpose. The woman who was Bella, who was Mrs. Vance feels like a character from a book I read long ago, a sad but instructive tale. There is no joy in the ruin of Marcus Vance. There is only a quiet, solemn satisfaction in the restoration of balance. He mistook silence for weakness, simplicity for poverty, and humility for low birth. In the end, his own tools, his arrogance, his greed, his need to belittle were the instruments of his downfall. I merely refused to play my assigned part in his story any longer. The consequences were unavoidable. They always are. For him, exposure, exile, permanent loss. For me, not a victory, but a liberation. A return to a self I had abandoned out of a foolish hope for a simpler love. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of this old house, I think about that love. I mourn not for him, but for the belief itself. I wonder if such a love, untainted by power or legacy, exists for someone like me. Perhaps not. But the truth, once spoken, is a solid thing to build upon, and I have finally spoken mine. A soft knock at the door. Arthur enters, carrying a tray with a pot of tea and the evening papers. He sets it down, his eyes kind. Everything is finalized, Miss Sterling, he says. The last of the Vance Stream matter is closed. The foundation charter is approved. Thank you, Arthur, I say. He hesitates. Do you ever wonder if a different choice earlier on? I look past him out the window at the rolling, misty greens of the estate that has been in my family for 200 years. A legacy of responsibility, not just wealth. No, I say, and I find that I mean it. There are no different choices. There are only truths we face sooner or later. We faced ours. He nods, understanding. He pours the tea, the gentle steam rising between us. Outside, the last of the twilight fades into a deep, calm night. The story is over. The reckoning is complete. There is nothing left to say.